Hello, everybody, and welcome to Gleed's Market Report webinar. We're delighted to have you here today. For those of you that don't know us that well, Gleed's the UK's foremost independent international property construction consultancy with over 130 years experience in the property and construction industry. We've got 1,900 dedicated staff across 6 continents and 71 offices, and we're growing all the time. Today, you're joining around 500 people who are tuning into what is this, a regular update series of webinars aimed at helping you gain insight and analysis around a market that's going through what some are saying are once in a generation changes. Easy for me to say. Knowledge is power, so they say, and so the better data at your fingertips, the stronger you are. I'm Julian Barlow, your moderator for the webinar, and I've spent the past 35 years or so in and around our industry, the last 18 being with Gleeds. Over the past few weeks, our insights and analytics team have been gathering valuable data and capturing views from across the industry through our market surveys to understand and respond to the current challenges and opportunities that the industry faces. And I want to say, first of all, thanks to all of you that responded and helped us gain this rich understanding and has assisted us in developing our report and this webinar. Today, our webinar will cover many aspects of working in the built environment, from issues associated with the supply and demand of labour and materials, to challenges involved in motivating and maintaining a workforce, right through to business improvements through working smarter, looking at the latest digital and technological options that are available to you. As it says on the slide, here today with you is our insights and analytics team. That's James Garner and Nicola Herring. I have to say, these are the brains behind our webinar and the report that follows. It's through their diligent efforts that we've got the webinar here today. Now, Louise Ellis is joining us as well. She's our Chief People Officer, and Ben Huskinson, our Chief Digital Officer. So we're going to cover a broad span of topics today. Now, I know we're approaching the end of the day. Caffeine levels are dropping and the Olympic highlight show beckons. Well, we don't intend to detain you too long. The presentation will last for around 20 minutes, and this will then be followed by a question and answer session. And we'll be getting live questions coming in as we go along. You should have all you need to know in 45 minutes. And those of you that have been here with us before will know that I'm quite ruthless about finishing at 45 minutes. So final thing, bit of housekeeping. We have some polls during the presentations in which we'd ask you to participate. Everyone will get a copy of the report emailed post-webinar, so you don't have to make notes. You can just listen. And so without further ado, I'll now hand over to James Garner to kick off the webinar. Over to you, James.
Thank you very much, Julian, and thank you to everyone for joining us on this webinar. Before we start, I'd just like to give a brief overview of what we're going to cover today. We're going to have start by having a quick look at the economic and societal issues facing our industry, and then move on to tender opportunities and tendering and what's happening in the market, and also looking at site productivity and labour. I'll then hand over to my colleague Nicola, who'll take you through the material shortages in the industry, other threats to our industry, and our inflation forecast for the next quarter and also for the next 2 years. We'll then hand over to Louise, who will talk us through recruitment, retention, and D&I, and Ben will sum up with our digital transformation and how that's going to affect our industry. We'll then hand back to Julian, who will take you through some questions and answers. So, as Julian said, there will be a number of polls, and they're going to be very relevant to some of the insights that come out from this webinar. So please do take part if you can. It's just a simple matter of just clicking on the answer that applies to you. And also, if you do have any questions, please put them in the chat Q&A function. We'll try and cover as many as we can as we go through the Q&A session. But any that we don't get to, we will be sure to write back to you as part of the email you'll get with the market report at the early part of next week. In terms of the methodology and the survey that we issued was a wide-ranging industry survey. We had well over 100 responses, and it was roughly split 50-50 between contractors and consultants. And what was interesting was around 64% of respondents were either leadership or senior management, and a further 28% were middle management. So we've got some really credible insights, and there's some really interesting views about the unprecedented things that are happening in our industry at the moment. So that's the agenda. If we can now move on to poll number 1, and it's a really simple one to get us going. Just what type of organization are you part of? Are you a contractor, client, consultant, developer, landowner, occupier, or other? And I'll give you all a few seconds just to respond. And this is going to be really useful for us to help us know what kind of audience we got. So when it comes to the Q&A, it will give us a good idea which questions to pitch. So I'll just leave that running for a few more seconds. Great. And we've got majority of consultants, 63% of consultants, around 18% contractors, 6% clients, 70% developers. So we've got pretty much every part of the industry covered, to one extent or another. So that's great. Thank you for that. So moving on now to the main part of the presentation, and looking at the economic and societal issues, it's fair to say there are many factors at play at the moment. So whilst we're making some generalizations in the 20 minutes we've got, it's important to recognize that now more than ever, every project and every situation has to be judged on its own merits. And of course, societal issues do impact construction and vice versa. So everything that's happening at the moment with COVID and Brexit and materials impact each other. So firstly, looking at societal impacts, GDP growth in May was actually weaker than anticipated and still below pre-pandemic levels. So even though there's lots of positive stats and lots of good news coming through, this shows that things are still can change very, very quickly, and we've got to keep a very firm eye on what's happening out there. The pandemic, as it's known, means that the construction sites are starting to be affected in terms of productivity, and we'll go into that in a lot more later in the presentation. In terms of employment and furlough, as we predicted in last quarter, and anyone who tuned into our webinar last quarter, we were starting to see that this might happen, that unemployment is slightly increasing, and this is obviously to be expected as the furlough scheme comes to an end. What is more uncertain is the longer term implications as the changing nature of society becomes apparent. In terms of construction, construction output is starting to level off and is now more or less at pre-pandemic levels, which is obviously encouraging. And this is backed up by the SIPS UK Construction Activity Index, which shows a further momentum since June. So we expect construction output to continue to increase as more confidence returns to the market as we slowly return to normality. But this is obviously very dependent on no major changes to the roadmap. There is some degree of caution, especially as we approach autumn and winter. And there's no understating the issues around material availability, which has to temper some of that optimism. And we'll come to that a lot more detail later on. But generally, I think the industry is in a much better place than it's been for a while. And there's a lot of positive measures coming out. Moving on then to tender opportunities. We ask our respondents about current tender opportunities. We think this is a really good barometer of what's happening in the market. And we can see on the left-hand side that contractors are more optimistic about tender opportunities. And this is a trend that has continued over the past few quarters. 89% of contractors think that tender opportunities are either being maintained or increasing, which is up from 74% in the last quarter. However, we can see that consultants' clients have seen a very slight dip since the last quarter. And as they are at the front end of things, this may be a sign of things just starting to level off a little bit after the optimism of things really starting to motor. On the right-hand side, I think we asked respondents about the sectors where they're seeing the opportunities. And I guess no real surprises in those top 5. Similar to last quarter, residential, public sector, infrastructure, health and care and education. But what is a little more encouraging is that sectors such as commercial offices and student accommodation, their stats are starting to bounce back quite significantly since the beginning of COVID and over the last few quarters, which is obviously really good news. So moving on then to our second poll, we're asking you whether you've seen an increase in the number of people self-isolating on projects. That can be either professional people or on sites. So again, I'll give you a few seconds to answer that. And this will be really interesting as we compare it to the results from our survey in the next slide. Right, okay, so the results are in, and the majority of people, 53% say that they have seen an increase, 25% say no, and 21% I don't know. So the majority seeing some kind of increase in people self-isolating. And as we move to the next slide, that does lead on nicely to some of the findings here. On the top, you can see that 70% of contractors said that site productivity is within 81 to 100% range, which is good. It's good numbers, but it's actually a slight dip from the winter and spring reports. Our last report had 76%. And we think there's a few factors behind this change. Partly due to the pandemic, which links to the poll we just asked you to answer, because construction workers not always able to work. And in some cases, we're hearing that some sites have had to partially shut down. But it may also be due to the end of the legal restrictions, meaning that less people are being cautious and therefore inadvertently spreading the virus. I think that the industry did really well under very clear government guidelines, but it remains to be seen what might happen in the autumn and the winter, where contractors might have more of a challenge in maintaining caution. Although it's worth noting that the vast majority of contractors that we've spoken to are continuing to adopt the CLC site operating procedures. In terms of labour, whilst a lot of discussion has very rightly been around the serious issues with materials, we did note in our last report that labour issues may be a longer term issue in our industry. The results of our survey actually back this up. And we asked contractors who have experienced issues with labour in the past quarter. And that's increased by 26.5% in one quarter, up from 17.5% last quarter to 44%, which is obviously a significant increase. We also asked whether respondents had seen an increase in the labour rates. And again, that is up from 44% last quarter to 63%. So a real trend emerging there. And we anticipate the labour problems becoming worse as the long-term impacts of Brexit and the freedom of movement reduces the pool of labour we can draw from. And in reality, the material shortages will, in the medium term, sort themselves out as supply and demand sort of correlate. But I think the longer term issues around labour availability and the skill shortages in our industry may be longer felt. So moving on to materials, I'm going to hand over to my colleague Nicola Herring now to take you through some of the findings around materials.
Thanks, James. 80% of contractors who responded to our spring survey said that they had experienced issues with the supply of materials and products on their projects in the first quarter. Since then, during the second quarter, issues have continued, and 77% of respondents to our recent summer survey have said that they see the situation worsening over the next quarter. Sharp recovery from the pandemic globally continues to cause extended lead-in times and cost increases, and significant issues are expected to continue until at least the end of the year. The materials issues are impacting all projects, and you can see that survey respondents thought that large and medium new build projects, followed by large infrastructure projects, are being most impacted. This was interesting to us as earlier on, as issues were starting to emerge, some trade press were indicating that smaller projects were most impacted due to the sort of just-in-time procurement of materials and the less certainty of pipelines. However, the survey results show that larger new build and infrastructure projects are being significantly impacted, and we think this is predominantly due to the result of extended lead-in times, with suppliers now offering dates of first quarter 2022 and beyond for delivery for many materials and products. This is further demonstrated by 84% of respondents to our recent LinkedIn poll saying that the ongoing issues with materials are causing delays to their projects. Similar to our last report, steel frame, facade and mechanical and electrical services related packages are where respondents are seeing most issues, although the majority of packages are affected in some way, either by extended lead-in times, price increases which are regularly being notified for many materials and products, or both. There are also issues with deliveries, with an acute driver shortage reported. And according to Logistics UK, the logistics industry is now lacking almost 80,000 drivers, a figure up from approximately 50,000 in early 2020. Respondents to our survey said that contractors will overcome materials difficulties by looking for alternative specifications, reprogramming and resequencing works, and stockpiling materials. It goes without saying that increased communication and early engagement with suppliers is paramount, and that early orders should be placed wherever possible. Contractors who responded to our spring survey saw materials availability in further waves of COVID-19 as the biggest threats to the construction industry. Concerns about materials and labour shortages have remained for contractors responding to our summer survey, and 77% think materials and labour are the biggest threat. The remaining 23% instead seeing further variants of COVID-19. Inflation forecasts for the upcoming 12 months have generally increased to reflect the impact of material and labour cost increases. You can see on the slide that there are positive and negative pressures influencing the market. There are cost pressures for materials, with the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy All Work Construction Materials Price Index increasing by 10.2% in the year to May 2021. Skill shortages and labour pressures and wider impacts such as the pandemic, ongoing shipping issues and shortage of drivers are having a significant impact. However, project approvals have been slower and fewer projects coming forward in 2020 and early 2021 are creating some competitive tendering situations, with some contractors still filling their pipelines. The wider economy continues to recover, but as James mentioned earlier, there's still some uncertainty due to the lifting of restrictions and opening up and what course this takes. Inflation forecasts for the upcoming year, third quarter 21 to second quarter 22, are between 2.5% and 6%. In some areas, particularly Greater London and Northern Ireland, defined spikes are starting to be seen in some tender returns, reflecting particular challenges in those markets. In London, there's traditionally been a reliance on the EU workforce, and there's been reduced numbers of EU workers since Brexit. And in Northern Ireland, the materials challenges are being exacerbated by trading issues. In other areas, the materials and labour cost pressures are being tempered slightly by a more competitive market. The remainder of 2022 and going forward into 2023, inflation is expected to return to more typical levels as supply and demand balances and costs and supplies stabilise. Now more than ever, it is important to consider inflation on a case-by-case basis, considering the particular factors which may influence a project. Procurement strategy, programme, and the nature and specification of the project will all influence inflation. For further information, including full sector and regional updates, please see our full market report, which will be published next week. I'll now hand over to Louise, who will look at recruitment, retention, and diversity and inclusion.
Thank you very much, Nicola. Hi, everybody. Got another poll for you now, if you wouldn't mind completing this. The question is, has your organisation's flexible working policy adapted since the pandemic? You can just take a moment to answer that question, that would be great. We at Gleeds have looked into this very, very carefully and can really see the benefit of amending the policy. And you can see there from the poll, we've got 83% of respondents saying that you've done the same. We formed a group called the Future Fit Working Group at the start of the pandemic, and they've run several surveys to check in with our employees to see how they're faring, and also how to respond to their, their wishes in terms of ways of working. It was the place, the Future Fit group was the place where all COVID-related changes to the business were discussed, how best to communicate them to our employees, and also the place where we gathered feedback on what was working well and what wasn't. We then built our ways of working policy, which was the amendment to our flexible working policy. And in order to keep productivity high and keep our employees engaged and feeling safe and secure at work, the ways of working policy has at Gleeds looked to address the issues that people raised within the survey. Moving on now to look at recruitment. You're probably all aware that the market is hot right now in terms of jobs available. We're seeing around about 35,000 jobs available as vacancies across businesses at the moment, which is the highest that we've seen in around 20 years. Certainly the same situation in Gleeds. We have a number of global vacancies, probably higher than I've certainly seen at Gleeds. We think this is because of the continuation of the skill shortage within the industry, and goes hand in hand with all of our efforts to make the construction industry a good career choice for those wanting a career after school or after university. The majority of candidates we know, when they come to interview, have got at least one or two other job offers on the table, which basically makes the job market in construction very much a candidate-led market at the moment. Base pay remains the most important element of someone when they're considering a new role, and 65% of those who filled in our survey stated that. Interestingly, though, an increased amount, so 29% put wellbeing initiatives at the top of the list of importance for looking for a new job. And this clearly relates to the changes that we've seen in people's needs and preference to work flexibly to fit their work around their lives rather than the traditional fitting their lives around work. Benefits is still important, but certainly base pay and wellbeing initiatives are the most important. So moving on to diversity, we can see here that 56% of the respondents have said that they believe our industry is taking diversity and inclusion seriously. However, that leaves 44% of people either disagreeing or being unsure, and this really does remain a concern. I think we're all aware that by having a diverse workforce throughout the organisation really does improve a business's productivity because of the diverse nature of thinking and contribution. And we can see from the survey on the right-hand side of this slide that you feel that one of the ways to help improve diversity in construction is to offer a greater opportunity for flexible working. And we absolutely agree with that at Gleeds. And one key thing that we're looking at within our D&I agenda is making sure that our culture is fair, inclusive and respectful. And we believe that if we manage that in every single part of our business, that the diversity of our workforce will improve. And this is basically because if people can feel very comfortable with being at work, feel that they can do their job really, really well, and feel that they can be themselves whilst they're at work, their productivity will be higher because their engagement at work will be better. So we see that D&I is an output of a fair, inclusive and respectful environment. 54% of you have said that diversity will increase through targeted apprenticeships, and absolutely I agree with that. We're seeing that at Gleeds as well. We need to be growing our own talent and attracting in graduates, attracting in apprentices, so that we can train them within the construction industry ourselves. 45% of you have said that mentoring will help improve diversity, and absolutely that is the case that we're seeing here at Gleeds. We've got a structured mentoring programme that's in place. It's been in place for the last 18 months and has certainly supported the progression of females within Gleeds. Interestingly, 18% of you have stated that you feel that the increase in digital and data focused roles will also help improve diversity. And we know that the variety of roles that are on offer, and we believe will be on offer in the digital and the data arenas, will see the opportunity for a different type of employee to be able to apply and join the construction industry. So potentially people who have flexible working requirements, either caring needs for families or elderly parents, opportunities for Gen Z employees, and the digitisation of jobs, of roles, opening up jobs to more female employees, which will all help the quest for improving diversity in construction. So I'm going to hand over to Ben Huskinson now, who's our Chief Digital Officer, who will continue the discussion on digital. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Louise, and hello everyone. Right, so we've got our fourth and last poll of the day, are you seeing increased use of digital tools on projects? It'd be quite interesting to see what the audience say about that. And the answers are 79%. Okay, that's good. That's in line with our expectations and certainly in line with what Gleeds are doing. So digital transformations are progressing in all parts of our industry. Clients, consultants, contractors, TFM providers are all progressing their digital agendas. The construction industry has been slower to react to digital because of the transient nature of a projects and the fragmentation which is prevalent in the industry. But it is beginning to happen, and it's certainly becoming more visible. And COVID has accelerated digital transformation programs, ours included. At Gleeds, we're actively digitally augmenting what we do. We're devising strategies to better use our data and convert it into an asset. We're globalizing our R&D strengths and pooling the resources and using them more effectively. We're connecting and unitizing the technology globally. And we're about to launch some new digital products and services which will lead to monetization and increasing value proposition to our clients. We expect huge growth in BIM, digital twins, data analytics, artificial intelligence prediction tools, and we expect a plethora of startups, new products, new services and solutions which connect services, all designed to increase value to clients. And the truth is, the more that BIM is adopted in the industry and the more that digital twins are used, the more structured data will be available, which in itself will increase automation and efficiency. It will help to reduce waste. There'll be a lot less abortive hours in pre-construction because there's more completed design and better planning. There'll be a lot less waste on site and during construction, and there'll be far more efficiency whilst operating buildings. So we don't see digital as something to be scared of. We see digital as offering exciting opportunities and a way that's going to allow us as Gleeds to get better and allow us to create new services and products and augment what we do to increase the value that we offer to our clients. Thank you, and I'll hand back to James for the sum up.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Ben. And I'd really like to thank everyone for tuning into this webinar. And I really hope you found it informative. And I'd also like to thank the panel and everyone involved in this webinar. I think the headline is that things are definitely starting to pick up, but we shouldn't be blind to the challenges ahead. The seatbelt of the government's restrictions have lifted, and that's hopefully going to give clients the confidence to press ahead with plans. But at the same time, the industry, much like the rest of the country, is going to have to learn to deal with the challenges of COVID and Brexit for the medium and long term. So I think it's really time for the industry to shine, use the opportunity of digital transformation to create a construction 2.0. This also needs to embrace talent from across society and not just the historical male-dominated demographic, which unnecessarily limits our potential. So our summary report will be issued early next week, and everyone who's watching this webinar will receive a copy of that along with any questions that we aren't able to get to in the next section. Also, if you want to download the report or any other thought leadership articles, please go to gleeds.com, where you'll be able to find regular updates and news. So at this point, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and hand back to Julian for questions and answers.
Thanks very much, James. That's great, and thanks everybody. Great presentations, really good. Now we've got a quarter of an hour left, so I want to whip through as many questions as I can. And the first one is from Joe from Lang O'Rourke, who says, one of the key takeaways, and this is for you, James, rather than anybody else, one of the key takeaways from the survey is not only the increasing cost of labour, but also the potential shortage of labour. Do we see this meaning that projects across the board, both private and public sector facing, may find they're being delayed? And do your results also reflect the impact of the pandemic?
Okay, thanks, Julian. Yeah, a lot there. I think in the short term, the pandemic is undoubtedly having an effect. And you've seen that from some of the results in the poll that we did earlier on. But I think actually the longer term causes of the labour issues will be more aligned to Brexit and what's happened there, and the reduction of the labour available in the medium to long term. Because even at a domestic level, I'm sure a lot of people have seen this, you know, doing a home extension or home improvement or garden work even is proven to be a challenge at the moment. And that is obviously going to filter out into the larger projects, both private and public sector. I think the government really needs to address this, and the industry. So the government and the industry and our industry bodies like the RICS and CIOB, in terms of this skill shortage and how can we address it to plug the gap. But even if they did that today and got a handle on it, I think there's still going to be a lag in the medium term, which we all have to kind of come to terms with. So I think delays are definitely possible, but the ways to mitigate that is proper planning and reducing risk. And that has to come from obviously consultants, project managers, QSs, contractors and clients to really sort of understand what the potential risks are, getting orders in time so that you're just mitigating the effects of any of these delays.
Okay, James, sorry, just to wind you, could you just wind up as quickly, only because I've got a lot of questions to get through.
Yeah, I think just to sort of sum up, I think the issue is probably going to get worse before it gets better. I think the materials issues will sort itself out in the medium term, but the labour issue, I think as an industry, what a wide industry, we have to get to grips with.
Thanks, James. Great. I hope Joe's happy with that. Louise, one for you here, and carrying on really from James's last point about labour. Training and mentoring would now appear, and this is from Simone from Make Architects. Training and mentoring would now appear to be key elements of the workplace offering. What advice have you got for employers that need to motivate and retain staff in this very buoyant market?
Retention of staff is absolutely key. It's almost more important than recruitment, although they do go hand in hand. And I'd say probably that if you start right at the beginning of an employee's life cycle within a business, you've got to make sure each business has got to make sure that we've got induction sorted, that we've got core training on offer to people, and to basically lay the foundations for the employee to be able to work to the best of their ability. I think, and also an important question is to always look at it from the employee's perspective, so that you can answer the question of, well, what's in it for me? Why, if I'm an employee joining a new business, why should I do any training? Why should I look at improving my knowledge? And it's to help them understand the benefits of actually studying and putting some time into their own development. One thing that we found at Gleeds is that it's been about the education of the managers, the line managers of the team members, so that to make sure that the line managers are aware of what training is on offer, what mentoring programs exist within a business, so that when they're having their regular performance discussions with their employees, that they can point their employees into the right direction to help their own self-development. It's also important to have a range of different methods of training. So it might be the old style classroom, face-to-face training. It could be webinars, it could be mentoring, it could be e-learning, it could be a combination and a blended approach, because not all people learn in the same way. So that's kind of my top tips, I'd say.
Okay, great. Thanks, Louise. Ben, over to you. In terms of the digital thing, we've got something from a question from Matt here, who's in London Cost Management. He asked, what do you think are the biggest two things that have improved efficiency and automation that have been accelerated by the pandemic?
Oof, good question. Okay, so the two things which I believe COVID is accelerated, which I think is improving efficiencies, is communication techniques. you know, the use of Teams and other similar tools for business development, operations and project meetings has definitely increased the frequency of those meetings. So we can do a lot more, and we can get a lot more done because there's a lot less time wasted traveling. It's absolutely facilitating the sharing of documents so we can work more collaboratively and effectively. And I also think it's going to fast track real estate strategy reviews, which will again lead to more efficient solutions. And all of those have ESG benefits, which is something very important to Gleeds as well. I think the second really big thing is that this has accelerated the consideration of digital technologies to augment how business is delivered. For consultants, anything which involves people, process, tech, and data can be augmented and automated and made more efficient. And that's something, like I've said earlier, it's something Gleeds are doing. And for contractors, the use of BIM and linking this with modern methods of construction will absolutely increase efficiency as well. So I think those are the two main things from my perspective, Julian.
Okay, Ben, thanks for that. That's very comprehensive. Nicola, over to you. Peter from Landsec asks, we see that Northern Ireland and London are especially negatively impacted by current issues of material and labour shortages. Can you unpick that a bit? Why are those two regions, do you think, more impacted than some of the others?
Traditionally, London has been quite reliant on EU labour to supply the construction industry. And data from ONS has shown quite a significant reduction in employment in the construction market in London between 2017 and late 2020. And particularly significant is the reduction of 54% in EU labour during that time. So because London has traditionally relied on EU labour, this will affect labour costs in London. And we're starting to see that. So some recent salary data collected from construction firms showed an increase of 4.5% in May. And we're expecting to see further increases during the year as demand and activity keeps increasing. Moving on to Northern Ireland, there's just real issues with materials supply due to the pandemic, but also due to Brexit and the trading issues. There was a recent survey undertaken by the Construction Employers Federation of Northern Ireland, and they showed, I think it was about one in 5 Great British based suppliers are now no longer serving Northern Ireland. And then they also surveyed, I think it was 80 Northern Irish construction companies who are headquartered in Northern Ireland. And all of them were seeing materials issues. And I think it was about 40% of them were saying that they're critically impacted by these material price increases and issues. And there's just a real sense of concern in the Northern Irish construction market at the moment and what this all means, and particularly for public sector contracts.
Oh, okay, thanks. Yeah, it sounds a bit desperate over there. It's quite a big hike, isn't it, compared to the other regions? Louise, a question here for you, it's an interesting one, I think, because it maybe looks at things that have happened now that would not have happened for previous generations. The survey shows that well-being issues are now an important consideration for employers when they're looking to attract and retain talent. You've talked about that, you've shown the survey results, but what specific things do you think employees are looking for now that they might not have been looking for 5 or 10 years ago? I'm old enough to remember that when the most important thing to a male middle manager was a go fast stripe on his Ford Escort. Now I suspect life's moved on a bit and things are a bit different. What do you think?
Yeah, we've moved on from the petrol heads, I think, Julian.
Yeah.
What we're seeing really is a demand for it's flexible ways of working that are flexible. So things like core hours, flexible start times, finish times, maybe even shorter working weeks. We've had some feedback around other businesses shortening their working week to 36.5 hours. So it's only a slight drop from the standard, but it's much more important for employees now, as I said earlier, to be able to balance their work within their life rather than the other way around. So hybrid working, ways of working, it's just not traditional anymore. Flexibility to be able to work from home or be based from home. Certainly at Gleeds, what we've introduced since July the 19th has been a 50% presence in the office and 50% of the working week based from home. And we still feel it's really, really important to have people present in the office for, you know, the kind of the osmosis of the learning and the interaction and the ideas and the creativity generation that goes on by being amongst colleagues. A couple of other elements that are becoming more and more important are visibility on career progression and the role that you can then next move into, which might seem a little bit premature with someone who's just joined Gleeds, but or joined an employer. It's what they want to see next, where their next future step is going to be. And also, there's been more importance placed by candidates on the type of projects that they want to or hope to or aspire to work on. And all of this collectively, to me, says that it is very much an employee-led market, a candidate-led market. They're being very discerning which employer they join, and the competition is just really, really high.
Okay, interesting. Ben, looking to further elaborate on your answer last time, do you think the introduction of things like BIM and modern methods of construction and improved data capture and data manipulation are key to bringing greater reliability and productivity improvements to the built environment?
Yeah, in our opinion, the increased appreciation and use of BIM and digital twins will facilitate the capture of data, and that in itself will allow us to use the data better and more effectively. And the use of BIM and digital twins will facilitate the implementation of MMC, all of which will lead to greater reliability and efficiency. Okay,
now I've got one question for you all now, which is a very quick answer if you could, because we're running quite short of time. I'll start with you, James, which is a bit unfair, but it gives the others time to think about it. If you were to look at a sort of a window for the next quarter or maybe the next 6 months, what makes you most optimistic, and what is the biggest challenge area, do you think?
Okay, so in terms of optimistic, I think there's still a lot of pent-up demand. You know, we've gone through best part of 18 months of lockdowns, and we're emerging the other side with a lot of positivity. So I think there's a lot of that to come. In terms of challenge, undoubtedly, it's materials in the short term and labour in the medium to long term. And yeah, I think it will end up as a positive because the industry will have to sort itself out one way or another in terms of how we bridge that gap for the skill shortages that we've been suffering for a long time.
Great, thanks, James. Louise?
I would say that I'm most optimistic about seeing levels of employee engagement and productivity increasing, mainly due to hybrid ways of working. I think that's going to really tap into the positivity within employees' work-life balance. And I think our challenge is it's the continuing challenge of finding diverse talent to join us in the construction industry.
Great. Nicola, what would yours be?
No, similar to James, really optimistic about sectors picking up, and those that we saw quite a steep decline during the pandemic are really starting to pick up now, and large levels of vacancies all showing uptick in construction activity. But the real challenge is going to be materials and the impact of delays on projects, and then on subcontractors and contractors in the supply chain.
Great, thank you. Ben, you've got 30 seconds.
Right, no surprise, digital's the thing for me. It's the fourth revolution, and as far as I'm concerned, it offers us so many opportunities. That gives me so much optimism.
Brilliant. Thanks, guys. Well, that wraps up our webinar for today. I promised 45 minutes, and we're just about getting there. Thanks to all of you who attended. I hope you've gained some valuable insights from a wide spectrum of topics today. From Gleeds, I'd like to thank Louise, I'd like to thank Nicola, James, and Ben. And behind the scenes, all the organisation arrangements are only happening because a lady called Amy Curnow did an awful lot of work with this. So thanks again, Amy. It's down to your hard work and diligence that these happen. I'm Julian Barlow. Please join us again in the near future for our next market survey webinar, and hope everybody has a good summer. And here's to Team GB.